First is this Saturday, February 22nd, we'll be hosting a genealogy workshop here at the Archives that specifically helps with African American genealogy. You're able to register online on our website now. We'll have more workshops, including our general How to Do Genealogy workshop this summer. So keep a lookout for those workshop titles and dates coming soon. I'd also like to invite you on Monday, March 3rd, as we will have another research rundown as curator Jenna Abbott will discuss the research she has done on the Merci train, a wedding dress with quite an interesting history. And this is going to be an online program March 3rd at noon, so you can only view it on our Facebook and YouTube channels. And lastly, I want to invite you back next month as we continue our Food for Thought series, as Ed Bridges will present Lafayette, the nation's guest. And that will be on Thursday, March 20th at noon here in the Farley and online. Now, without much further ado, I'd like to introduce our wonderful speaker for today. Pia Marie Winters Jordan is the project director of the Tuskegee Army Nurses Project and is developing a multimedia documentary on the Army Nurses Corps members who served with the Tuskegee Airmen during World War II. She retired in 2018 as an associate professor at Morgan State University and now resides in St. Petersburg, Florida. And her presentation today is based on her book, Memories of a Tuskegee Airman Nurse and Her Military Sisters. And this is available for purchase here at the museum and also online on our store. So please join me in welcoming Pia Marie Winters Jordan.
Well, thank you all. Before I begin, I just wanted to get an idea of who's in the audience. So some of my presentation I can just zoom by, and then some I'll stay a little longer. So any teachers, professors, students, nurses, people from Alabama, people from outside of Alabama. Where are you from? Massachusetts. Okay. Any other states? No? I'm originally from Maryland. I was born in Washington, D.C. My father was a minister, a Methodist minister, and we lived in Northern Virginia and then moved to Maryland. So most of my life, except for the last 6 years, has been in Maryland. And I come to you from Florida, where it's about 70 degrees there. But I'm so glad that I kept some of my winter apparel for coming here. Now, first of all, I want to thank Alex, where she is, Alex Colvin for the invitation to be with you, and Zach, who's running the multimedia, for helping set all this up. The reason why I put this up, on the back of my book, there's what they call blurb, but an endorsement from Daniel Hallman. Many of you may know him. He was in charge of the USAF Research Center at Maxwell Air Force Base. And that's where I went initially to do some of my research about the Tuskegee Airmen nurses. And that's my mother. Okay. All right, my book was written was published in 2023 by New South Books, which was really from Alabama, but eventually they went under the University of Georgia Press. And the book recognizes the contributions of the 28 nurses who served on that base, Tuskegee Army Airfield, during World War II. Now, as Alex explained, basically this project is part of a larger multimedia project, which includes all of that. And I know you all can read, so you can read it yourself. But I did the research and did the interviews around the country and videotaped because I was working on a documentary. However, I did a book proposal and a publisher was interested, so I had to write a book. So I told them, give me a year to write a book, and I wrote the book. But basically, all of this is part of the project now. And see where it says acrylic statue? Well, I had an acrylic statue made of two of the nurses who were in a group picture. It was my mother next to her principal chief nurse. And I gave it to the Tuskegee, the Tuskegee Airmen historical site in Tuskegee, Alabama. So if you ever go there, you might ask, where is that statue? And so they have the statue. Thank you. Water. I'm just trying to get the technology right here. Okay, this is the scrapbook that started me on this presentation. My mother became ill in 2006. She was living independently at that time, and I'm her only child. So she went from independence to nursing home. There was no in-between assisted living. So she had several mini strokes. So what happened is, as I was cleaning out her apartment, I saw this blue scrapbook. It had Tuskegee Army Flying School on it and raised airplanes through it. And I was wondering, okay, I vaguely remember when I was younger seeing this, but you know how it kind of went over my head? So I started going through it. And what happened is I'm going, oh my goodness, there are these pictures of the Tuskegee Airmen and the nurses and all. I said, my mother was served with the Tuskegee Airmen. And so I'm going, oh my goodness, I'm a journalist. I've never done really anything with it. But I went from broadcast news into teaching it. And one of my colleagues suggested, what you have to do now. And I said, get the interviews of the nurses and airmen who knew them, because they were in their late 80s and 90s. So in 2009, I started going around the country, wherever I could find them, California, New Jersey, Maryland. Basically, those are the areas that I went to, specifically interviewing airmen, and Maryland, airmen and the nurses. And if you have a cell phone, you might want to take a picture of this slide. I gave my mother's scrapbook to the Smithsonian Institution, the National Museum of African American History and Culture. And if you go on those sites, they have a catalog record, and you can actually see everything that was in my mother's scrapbook because it's there. And actually, another nurse who I'm going to tell you about in a little bit, also, she gave her scrapbook to the museum. And one thing that was really great about this, let's see. I was living in Baltimore. I could take a train, the metro, and go into DC. So I went to the museum a lot, back and forth. But I have never been there to see this, but I have to go online really and just take a look at it. And also I donated my uncle. He was in World War II, a sergeant, and I donated his memorabilia. And I donated some more of my mother's memorabilia too. Okay, now, I just want to lay the foundation. The women I'm about to talk about, they were born between 1900s and 1925. And basically, if you lived in the South, as many of you do, back then, there was segregation. African Americans were not allowed to do certain things, to be certain places, to use certain things if they were Black. And that was because of Jim Crow laws. Now, the man you see here, he's actually white. And his name was, let me make sure I get his name right. He was an actor. And I'm trying to coordinate this. Okay. He was an actor during the 1800s. And what happened is he saw an African-American man performing somewhere in tattered clothes, singing Jump Jim Crow. And so he took on that persona in blackface, and he became a hit. But as you can imagine, he was making fun of African-American people. And so that's how the name Jim Crow laws was attributed to those laws of segregation because of the actor. And I just have a couple of pictures of showing the separation between African Americans and Black, colored only. And also, segregation pertained to the military during this time. Now, one thing, I just want to get terminology right, because some people, they look at me and they're saying, I've been told, well, you're white. No, I'm African American. I'm a light-skinned African American woman. My mother was light-skinned too, as you saw in that initial picture. My father was light-skinned. My grandfather was dark-skinned. And when he referred to African Americans, it was colored. And then my parents, when they referred to it, was Negro. And then when I was growing up in the 50s, 60s, it was Black. Then by the 70s, the term African American or Afro American, although that term can be traced also to the 1700s, but when it became more popular, it was then. So I just wanted to clear that because some people will have questions about that, especially some of you who are just watching online. Now, as I was mentioning, segregation not only affected civilian life, it also affected the military. Now, 1918, World War I ended. In 1925, this Army War College report came out. It was the employment of Negro manpower in war. And trying to, where you're not using your own computer. See it goes. Okay. So what happened is a report was made, and basically the report said that African American men, or Black men then, or colored men, they were cowardly, they could not handle certain responsibilities. You get the picture. And so we're talking about, we're in the 20s now, okay? Our country is going eventually into the Depression. And so by 1933, the president at that time was Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And there were organizations like the NAACP, other organizations, trying to get the country to allow professionals in the military, like lawyers, doctors, nurses, but they were not allowed, unless they were dealing with Black patients or whatever, to work in the military because there were no Blacks in the military as professionals. Basically, if you were a Black person, you had menial jobs. You could work in the kitchen, you could work in the mess hall, you could dig ditches, you could unload different things, but you were not allowed any professional positions. So, as we're going into 1939, Germany attacked Poland. France and Germany declared war on Germany. Now, the United States had not become involved in that war yet. But the organizations were still trying to encourage the president to allow professionals. Initially, he said no, but then there was an executive order, 8802, where it eliminated discrimination in the military service. However, it still had to be segregated, and that was a point that some people just didn't like. Why segregation? But they were going to allow pilot training. So they were segregated, the military segregated. So what happened is they were going to allow African American men to be trained as pilots for World War II, and they would be bomber escorts. They would escort white pilots to protect them as they were bombing. There was a problem because they weren't going to allow them to be with other white pilots who were training. They built a whole flying school just to train African American men how to fly planes. And they chose Tuskegee, Alabama. Why? Now, Tuskegee Institute, which is a historically black college and now university, they had a civilian pilot training program already set up there. And it was warm. So this entire base, Army base, was built just to train African American men because they weren't going to allow them to be trained with white pilot trainees. Just an aside, I went by the actual Army base yesterday. The private owner, I mean, it's gone through several hands over the years. It's not owned by the Army, but he had at one time had this beautiful gate up there with a sign. It's a lumber company, and he was planting his lumber around the base. I went there yesterday, trying to find the gate. I went up the road back. It's off of 199 County Road 56, if you ever want to see the actual base. But now the sign is kind of down and the whole area is under a fence. But that was actually an Army base, a segregated Army base in 1941, starting in 1941. Now, okay, they're going to start training. What happened December 7th, 1941? The Japanese attacked our base in Hawaii, Pearl Harbor. So now, I have to go back. So now it's on. War is declared. We're now part of World War II. The thing is, what do you need? If you have an Army base, what do you need if you have an Army base? Not just pilot trainees, but who else has to be on the Army base to help run it? Well, you had to have a hospital, so if people got sick, right? A station hospital. You had to have some people who are the cooks, who are cleaning, administration, people who are training the airmen, pilot cadets. And you would need nurses. Very good. Someone mouthed it. Now, to be in the Army Nurse Corps, you had to be a member of the American Red Cross. If you were black, you could not be in the Red Cross. So they're going to have a station hospital there. And nurses at this time, black nurses couldn't be in white civilian hospitals, let alone be in white military hospitals. And they couldn't be in the Army Nurse Corps at all, so what to do? Well, this woman, Della Rainey, she was a nurse. And let me make this point. To be in the Army Nurse Corps, you had to have been a graduate of nursing school. You had to be a registered nurse, an RN. You had to be a member of a national nursing organization, which was a problem for nurses who were in the South. So there was an organization who had been lobbying to get black nurses into civilian hospitals, but now they were also working to get black women into military hospitals, and it was called the National Association of Colored Graduate Nurses. So they took on that role. So you ask, well, how did black nurses even get into the military during World War II? They told Della Rainey that she was black, she can't get in. She can't be a member of the American Red Cross. So what she did, she wrote a letter to the head person of the American Red Cross. She explained to her that she wanted to serve her country. And do you know, they sent her a membership card. So she was the first African-American woman in the Army Nurse Corps during World War II, and she became the first principal chief nurse in the Army Nurse Corps during World War II, and that's Della Rainey. So here are some of the nurses who served at Tuskegee Army Flying School during World War II. The base was being built in 1941, and some of the doctors and all came in 41. But the first nurses to come in, they came in March 29th, 1942. There were Della Rainey and, of course, 3 or 4 others. At any one time, there were 20 nurses, and at the end, and let me show you this. There's my mother. I believe that's the picture of the last nurses who were left on the base when they started closing it down. There's my mother there. Okay, there's my mother. See where she's standing next to Della Rainey? That's the statue I had made of the 2 of them together. And I also have a banner made since I wasn't going to carry that big thing around much longer. There was one problem, though. These nurses arrived in 1942, and about 13 others arrived. My mother was not one of them. She was having trouble getting in. And so, as she told me, I think she first tried to go to Fort Bragg, but seems like people were dragging their feet to let her get in. So she wrote a letter to the National Association of Colored Graduate Nurses. And this is in 1943. And this is the letter they sent her back. By March 1943, guess where she was serving? She was at Tuskegee Army Flying School as one of the 28 nurses there. Now, there's Della Rainey. As I told you, she was the principal chief nurse. Catherine Ball was the chief nurse. So Della was the main person, Catherine Ball. Ruth took Della Rainey's place when she was promoted to a base in Arizona, and then Frances McLeod took Ruth Faulkner's place when she left the service or was transferred to another location. But I'd like to introduce you now to the other 24 nurses who served at Tuskegee Army Flying School during World War II. And there they all are. And again, I have to, that's Mom right there. And my book, so I'm trying not to tell you, I don't want to give everything away that's in the book, but I have something on every one of those nurses. Sometimes it's just a paragraph. Sometimes I have a whole lot of information, and I'm still obtaining information, trying to talk to family members. But what I do, I have a website, if you saw earlier, and there's a bookmark outside which has my website on it. And at the end, I'll show you the website. Anything I find that goes beyond what's in the book, I put it on the website. Now, these nurses, I just want to show you where they were from. They were mostly from the East Coast and some from the Midwest. And these are the nursing schools that they graduated from. Now, only about 14 nursing schools were run under white administrations that had nursing schools for Black nurses. My mother and 3 of the other Tuskegee nurses all graduated from St. Philip Hospital School of Nursing in Richmond, Virginia. Richmond, Virginia the St. Philip Hospital was under the Medical College of Virginia. So it must have been comforting for my mother when she arrived that there were 3 other of her schoolmates there. Now, one thing about Richmond, St. Philip Hospital was a Black hospital. So of course they would need Black nurses. And just so you know, Black nurses could only serve Black medical personnel, German prisoners, and possibly Italian prisoners. So they had to only be on bases where they were there. That was their limitation. And oh my goodness, I never thought about, I made a little chart of each one, but I'll have to go back to and see how but you can kind of see it. But I'll change this for future reference. But it goes with all the schools again, where they were from and their names. Okay, I wanted to bring up this woman and this woman because they have an Alabama connection. Sarah Thomas was from Marion, Alabama. Any of you familiar with Marion? Okay, good. And that's, as I understand it, west of here, pretty much, western Pacific. She was sent to Liberia. She was one of the nurses. There were 3 nurses from Tuskegee who eventually were sent to Liberia, and you'll have to read my book to find out what was happening there. Mamie Frierson, I believe that's Bugan, her husband and son, Nelson Bugan Sr. and Jr., they were killed in automobile accidents same accident in 1971. They were buried in Tuskegee and let me make sure I get this right, Archdale Cemetery. And so she was buried at Archdale Cemetery, although she was from South Carolina. She was born in South Carolina. But Archdale Cemetery, that's where she was born when she died in 2009. So those are the only 2 nurses where I found that there was an Alabama connection. Okay. Now, the nurses who did end up at Tuskegee Army Airfield, they came from nursing schools, of course. Some of them came from civilian hospitals, but they were hospitals where they were Blacks. And then some of them came from military hospitals because Della Rainey, she was at Fort Bragg when she got the call to go to Tuskegee. And then some of the nurses were transferred from Fort Livingston in Louisiana. Now, we're going to see how this, I have to work this, see how this is going to work out. This is one of what's called a DOTA, Documented Original Tuskegee Airmen, DOTA. And that's the terminology for those who served on that base, their DOTAs. Dr. Cyril Byron was an armorer. He put the ammunition on the planes. That's how he served there, or when they went overseas. And I asked him once, what kind of effect was it to have Black nurses on your base? And this is what he said, and I'm going to, let's see. It
was a good effect, good to know they were there. You know, we knew of the segregation that went on. And if I got sick, it was good to know there was a nurse stationed there who I know is going to take care of me, not push me on the side or, work with me because you had to. They worked with us not only because they had to as a nurse, but because we had more feeling towards them as they were towards us.
And you know what was funny about this? I found out he lived about 4 miles from me. And when I was teaching at Morgan State University, I had an intern, and we went over to his house, and and there was another airman who lived behind him. And so they were just right around the corner, literally. Now, this is an excerpt from my book, and I'm going to read it to you. You can read it up there. But this is from an actual pilot. I went to the Tuskegee Airmen, their national convention in 2011, and I interviewed some of the pilots, the airmen, and a couple of them told me they would pretend to be sick so that they could go down and see the nurses. Because I might not have mentioned, the nurses started out as lieutenants in the Army Nurse Corps. The airmen were pilot cadets. They were just learning to fly. They saluted the nurses. The nurses had rank. As one of the airmen told me, we could look, but not touch. So this is from Colonel Thomas. I can recall going to the clinic with a so-called headache. When I got there, I was looking at all these nice ladies, and before I could say a word, one of the upperclassmen, my predecessors, the successful guys, said to me, "What are you doing up here?" And I said, "I don't feel quite." He said, "Get out of here. You've just come up here to see the girls, see the nurses. You guys get out of here. You have no business here." Coming from Detroit, I hadn't been around that caliber of lady. All my friends were school people, all in school. I was 16, 17. What did you know about ladies at 17? But when you are plucked into a situation where there is a plethora of formally trained ladies that are commissioned officers, man, that's different. You just sort of sit there in awe. Now, of course, when the nurses arrived, they were nurses. That's what they're training, basically nurses. But they did have to go through some military protocol. And as the years went on, the protocol became more and more extensive. But this is just the basic. Now, this is the basic station hospital organization. And the person in charge was the post surgeon. And he was the commanding officer of that base. Now, if you get my book, you'll have more time to look at it. Okay. So, although they were first a black commander, Colonel Cummins up there on the, oh goodness. There you go. Colonel Cummins became the post surgeon for that, for the hospital. And these are just some pictures of, dentistry. They had wards. Let's see which, and this is, let me show you. The station hospital and the nurses were right in here. Now, this is the nurses' organizational chart. So you see you have the principal chief nurse, which was Della Rainey. You had the chief nurse, which was Catherine Baugh. Ward 1 was surgical. Ward 2, 3, and 4 were the medical wards. And Ward 5 was gynecological. Did I pronounce that right? Gynecology and maternity and children. So my mother was a medical nurse. And I can tell you some stories she told me about being a nurse and being on night duty. That's all I'll say. Okay. But you got to get the book to read about it. Basically, the duties of the nurses was just like you would have in any civilian hospital. And the shifts that I've researched was basically with 8-hour shifts, but I talked to one nurse and she was saying it was like she had a 12-hour shift. However, and in the book I talk about this, there may have been something going on between her and a jealousy, which may have caused her to get more hours than other nurses. But I'm not saying that's the truth, but read the book and you'll see why I said that, why I wrote that. And basically, these were the duties, just like you would have in a civilian hospital. Now, these are some of the illnesses and injuries that the patients had to deal with. Now, tenorrhaphy, I specifically looked up the pronunciation of that because I didn't know what that was. It's a surgical suture of a divided tendon. But I know you're a nurse, you would know that. So basically, a lot of what you would see in a civilian hospital. Okay, this is Oliver Goodall. He was also a pilot. And I showed him my mother's scrapbook. See, he has my mother's scrapbook on his lap. I showed him her picture and he started laughing. And he said he believed she was his nurse when he had the mumps. And so I just asked him about the nurses, and let me see, talk to us. I'm having trouble pressing the button. I might need Zach for this. It's there, but it's, okay. Let me go back. Did I lose it? Okay. Now, oops. Let me go back to it. Okay, because there. For some reason, it's not working. You heard the other guy. Okay, well, we'll move on. But pretty much he said, he laughed about it and said, you know, the nurses were good, the doctors were good. And that was basically it. And the book will have more. Again, some of the surgeries and practices. Now let's see if we're gonna, not only did the nurses deal with the physical aspects of the airmen, but there were some other things they had to deal with. And my mother shared that, and I hope we get to hear her.
I knew some of them because they would come to the base hospital too, for treatment. And as I say, the treatment would be for pneumonia and influenza and colds and minor things like that. And if they had any serious illnesses, they would fly them to other places. But I had a chance to talk to the young cadets, and they were young. They were 19 years of age, and some of them would be homesick and everything of this sort. And I was a sounding board for them, and that was very interesting.
Well, too,
Okay, we got her, thankfully, Mom.
I knew some of them.
And okay, patients. I just got one of the years, I looked at how many cases that they had to deal with. Now, when Tuskegee Army Flying School they started to close it down around 1976, and then 77 it closed. The nurses who were still in the military were transferred to Lockbourne Air Force Base in Columbus, Ohio. And actually, one of the nurses, her name was Lieutenant Colon. She died a couple of weeks ago, maybe a month ago, and she was 104 years old. So if you look her up, because she was like the first African-American woman, well, after the integration of the military to be in the regular Army Nurse Corps. But anyway, the military also provided specialty training for the nurses in these areas. My mother was sent to St. Elizabeth's Hospital in Washington, D.C., which was a federal mental institution at that time. And she got additional training there. And guess what? After 10 years in the service, and when she retired, guess who hired her? St. Elizabeth's. They hired her to be a nurse at their facility in Washington, D.C. So she was in Maryland, D.C. area by that time. Now, keep in mind, she wasn't married yet. I was not around. This was her life before me, right? And I just wanted to show you some of the pictures in my mother's scrapbook about the different uniforms that they wore. I've had some people come up to me saying, gee, I wish it was where you had the white uniform, the cap. It just seemed so neat when they were wearing those. And some of their off-duty activities. Now, keep in mind, they were in Tuskegee, Alabama, and you had to be careful when you went out. My book talks about some of the situations they found. One of the things, though, since my mother was light-skinned, she could go downtown in Tuskegee, and people might assume she was white, so they didn't question it. So she could go in different places. But in my book, I talk about a couple of other situations involving other nurses. So they spent a lot of times, the airmen and the women spent time on base for activities. It was safer that way. And also, there was love in the air. Some of the nurses ended up marrying Tuskegee Airmen. I asked my mother once, because she married a minister, I asked her, why didn't you marry one of the Tuskegee Airmen? She said, they were sick. She's a nurse. She saw mostly sick people. But one of them wrote a little, and it's in the book, I'm not going to repeat it, this little, what I call ditty about my mother, and I'll just let you read it in the book. One of them, a cadet, wrote this beautiful poem about her, and it's in the book, because I can't remember to recite it, but it was so nice. He washed out, though. he didn't finish the program, but evidently he was in there for a while. And these are some of the people who were married to airmen. Now, Irma Cameron and Charles Dryden. Dryden was in the 332nd group, and the first night that Irma Dryden was on the base, her future husband, they had finished the program. They were being sent out, so there was going to be a party. And let me let you hear, and hopefully this will work, the story she told. Okay, here we go. Let's see.
That evening, you just wanted to get bathed and get in bed and get some rest, get some sleep. And all of us felt the same. Well, the three of us who would travel together felt the same way. And we decided that that's what we were going to do for the evening. But somebody, somehow or other, Ricky, Mary Rickards, we called her Ricky, and Dunkley had heard about this affair that was being held for the 99th Fighter Squadron because they were leaving that night. And they decided that, they'd like to go, but I was just completely worn out and I elected not to go. And before I could get to sleep, there was a knock on my door, and it was Captain Rainey telling me that this was not a request, this was a command, and I would go to the affair for the 99th that evening. So I did go to the affair for the 99th that evening and changed my whole life, of course.
And she got married. Let me see if I want to see. That's her bottom. Oh, that's her there, and her husband. Unfortunately, let me go back to her. Unfortunately, they were married for, I guess, about 30 years and they divorced. So that's what happened with them. And she died in 2020. Actually, this nurse and the nurse you're about to see died in 2020. She was 100 years old and the next nurse was 102. And I just want to leave the last word with Abby Voorhees Ross. She was a great friend of my mother. She lived in California, and she's kind of slurred at the beginning. She talks about camaraderie, but she died in 2020, 102. And the first 5 airmen who graduated, she was married to Mac Ross, one of them. Unfortunately, he died overseas. But she was there, and she ended her career in the Army Nurse Corps as a captain.
It's really a camaraderie that it could never repeat itself, really. God bless them all. But we all died out one by one.
And this was the slogan of the nurses. And I thank you for listening to my story. And here's some of my resources. And if you want to get in touch with me in the future, I did go down to Tuskegee to close my post office box because I only check it every maybe 3 or 4 years. And when I checked it yesterday, it was filled with mail for post office box 89. And 99 with people, I don't know who they were. There was one, I think was a scam letter for the Tuskegee Army project. But I'm gonna close it up. Excuse me, but if you all have questions, this is the time, and Alex has a microphone. If you would please speak in the microphone, because there are people who are listening online and they won't be able to hear unless you speak into the microphone.
So for those of us joining us online, if you want to put your question in the comments, it'll come to my phone. I can ask it on your behalf. Any questions here from the audience? Yes.
I wanted to say, first of all, thank you for being here. I'm Randall Williams, and with Suzanne LaRosa, we acquired your manuscript, and Suzanne says hello. She can't be here today, but had we not sold the imprint to the University of Georgia, I would have been your editor, and I'm sorry I wouldn't.
Yeah.
I
Okay, I won't
wanted
talk
to
about that.
ask you, so the hospital there in Tuskegee, the Andrew Hospital, what was I know they had the facility on the base, but what was the relationship between these nurses and the hospital there in Tuskegee?
Actually, I understood that that was the hospital for training student nurses at Tuskegee. Now, I don't know, there might have been, because I'd heard that the student nurses may have been able to come on over to visit. I don't know. Did you graduate from Tuskegee?
Yes.
Okay, we have one of the nurses who graduated in 1970.
Yes.
1970. But back then, there were only the 28 actual professional Army Nurse Corps nurses. But yeah, at Tuskegee Institute, that hospital was more like a training hospital. But thank you so much for selecting my book. You were the initial, I'm just overwhelmed. And thank you for coming. Okay.
I saw a nurse whose first name was Della. I wondered if she went on to become Della Sullins. If so, she was one of my instructors.
Okay, Della Rainey's married name, I don't think was that. And right now, off the top of my head, I can't remember somebody might Google it real quick. Because she was, I believe, a major, because she made her career in the military. But I can't remember. Well, you all will, that's an assignment to find her married name. Also, if any of you are military women, the Women's Military Memorial in Arlington, please register or tell your friends to register their service so that they can be recognized. And that's where I did some of my research. I went there and some family members had put in information about the different nurses.
That actually ties wonderfully with a question online about if you have worked with or do you ever plan to work with the Friends of the National World War II Memorial so you can continue sharing your mom's legacy, but also kind of maybe talk at large about like how memorials maybe helped you in your research and how they can kind of help get the story out.
Okay, let's see here. I just wanted to show you, in my travels, these are the different places I went to. The Women in Military Memorial that I just mentioned. My mother her last place of residency was the Charlotte Hall Veterans Home in Charlotte Hall, Maryland. And they had some information. Then, of course, I went to Archives 1, the United States Archives in DC, and Archives 2 in College Park, Maryland. I have to say, go Terps, because I'm a University of Maryland graduate, and the president asked us if we were someplace that's hollered out, go Terps. Then, of course, I went to the National Historic Site, Tuskegee University Archives. Now we're talking, I'm back in 2009. I'm starting this research, so I'm going all over to these places. The University of California at Riverside, they have the Tuskegee Airmen Archive. So I hope I answered that question.
Yes, I think they were specifically also if there's anything with the National World War II Memorial.
Yeah, I'd have to get that information. No, did I have the World War II Museum? I went there in, was it New Orleans? I visited there, but they didn't have a whole lot that I could use. But yeah, but whoever that was, make sure you send that information to her so I can look into that and see, maybe coordinate that. That might be a good resource.
It would be. And also even just as a way to get the story out there too.
Thank you, whoever it was who asked that question.
All right.
This is your time. This is your chance. Ask me now, because I'm flying back to where it's warm.
How did the archives end up at Riverside?
You know what was really funny about that? My uncle was a historian, Edgar Toppin Sr. And I found out later, a woman who worked this was in Virginia, and right now her name escapes my memory, but she laid the foundation for the University of California at Riverside. That was her project that she started there. So it was like, but you were in Virginia and now you're in California, and she started it. She just started, I think sometimes people who are in academia and all just have an idea that they want to, work on. And the California, because the Tuskegee Airmen, they have chapters all over the country. And evidently the Tuskegee Airmen, they were very supportive of that. Actually, it got to be when I went down there, it was like they were the original. They were the archive. They were the resource. But then Detroit, they have an archive or museum. And then of course, in Tuskegee, the National Historic Site. So, there's like push and pull.
The two Tuskegee chapters too, now that those first generation are leaving us.
Yeah, they are. I think there's how many left? One, or I know Stewart just died. I'm just kidding. The role is to keep the history going. And there's also an organization of the children and friends of the Tuskegee Airmen who are sharing the story. So basically they have a convention every year, and they invite people like me to come and share the stories about the different things that happened. Because there were more than just nurses there and doctors and of course pilot cadets, but you had the mechanics, the administration. So, and how many of you saw 6888? Well, that movie that was on Netflix, I saw it, and these were WACs, Women in the Army Corps. And so they dealt with getting the mail out to the proper soldiers and all, because the Postal Service was just, in the military, was a problem in England. Correct me if I'm getting that wrong. So the chapters are keeping the history going. They have, I think I heard in Alabama, it's Tuskegee Army Day coming up in March, I believe. And if you go around the country, different cities or different states, they have Tuskegee Airmen Day. Tuskegee Airmen Day. So it's a historical thing. It's just getting the history out.
Well, we had one more, and this is a great question also to end on. So one more question from online. This all started, of course, with your mother. So this person would love to know, what are some of your greatest memories of your mom?
Oh, my mother, and this is what I hear from other Tuskegee Airmen, they were just mom and dad. It was not like we were hearing anything, or did we care, as little kids and all. But I think for some of them, it might have been too painful a time to even share what went on during that time, because they grew up during segregation and Jim Crow, and that might have been more painful. And then as children, we probably didn't ask enough questions too. But that's what I hear from the children. They were mom and dad, and that's pretty much it. And it's like, I would hear my mother say names. Oh, Mom, is that did you go to nursing school with that? Were you in the military or what? You know, so, yeah.
So learning this was a
Yeah.
great moment for you to be able to learn about her.
Right. Unfortunately, she wasn't alive when the book was done and when I really did the research. But my mother was very soft-spoken. She was very kind, very religious. And I only got spanked twice in life. And it was my mother, not my father. He never, but my mother. But yeah, I would say my mother was very, she was helpful. She was a role model for me because she was a woman. She was a pastor's wife, a mother, a nurse, a daughter, a sister. She had different roles, like all of you, have different roles. But this is one thing I want to leave you all with. Please, especially during holidays, get with your relatives, older and the younger ones, and let them tell their stories, because you don't want to wait till like a relative dies and you're at their funeral and it's like, oh, I didn't know Uncle so-and-so did such and such, and I keep hearing that. I didn't know Grandpa was this. So please do that, because especially now phones, they have the little like recorders on them. You just, and video. So I thank you again for listening.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Please join me in thanking Ms. Jordan again. Thank you to everyone who joined us here in the Farley and everyone online. I did forget to thank, of course, our wonderful sponsor at the beginning of this. The Friends of the Alabama Archives sponsors all of our programming, but it would not be made possible at all without a grant from the Alabama Humanities Alliance. So thank you to them as well. Thank you to all of you. I hope to see you again next month on March 20th for Lafayette, the nation's guest. Thank you.